And they literally looked at me and said, it is much worse than that. You are not exaggerating, it's much worse. And then they talked about their concern for the younger brothers and sisters or younger cousins, where they were describing 8-9-year-olds being exposed to particularly harmful content, either exposure to pornography, but also to some of the influencers who, for young boys, really target messaging around women and girls.
Welcome to Care Vision's Family Talk, a space dedicated to exploring the challenges of raising children in today's world. I'm Lucy Johnston. Each episode, I chat with a guest and we dive into the real-life struggles faced by children and their carers, offering insights and practical guidance to help families feel understood, supported, and hopeful. Whether you're a parent, foster carer, grandparent, or anyone supporting the young people in your life, this is the place for you. Welcome to Family Talk from Care Visions, the podcast where we explore the issues shaping childhood today and what carers, families and communities can do to help children thrive. Children are growing up on smartphones and the evidence of harm is mounting. Research links heavy use to rising anxiety, distress and behavioural problems in children. So when does connection become harm? And could banning social media actually make things worse? As England debates banning under 16s from social media, a proposal that does not apply in Scotland, parents and carers are asking what really keeps children safe. I'm Lucy Johnston, and today on Family Talk from Care Visions, I'm delighted to be joined by Mary Glasgow, Chief Executive of Children First, Scotland's national children's charity, who says there's no silver bullet and that getting this wrong could do more harm than good. Mary, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
So, Mary, before we get into policy or solutions, I just want to start with a scale of what we're talking about. Research you shared with me from the Department of Education's Children of the 2020 study found 98% of 2-year-olds are now watching screens on a typical day, often for more than 2 hours. And those with the highest screen use had smaller vocabularies and were twice as likely to show emotional and behavioural difficulties. When you hear figures like that, what does that tell you about how early this issue is starting?
I think it tells us that trajectory, if that research had been 3 or 4 years early, you might have been talking about 7 or 8-year-olds maybe. The fact that at a rapid rate that age range is getting younger and younger, I think is really worrying. Because at a point when babies and toddlers really need to be engaging with human faces and emotions and language and all of the things that help children develop a sense of self, a sense of being loved and of being safe, they should be moving and playing and making sure that all their senses are being stimulated. And they need to do that to develop safely within the context of a relationship with another human, a caregiver, an adult, that's safe, that loves them and that responds to them. It just terrifies me that we allow our babies and our toddlers to spend so much time on screens at such a crucial stage in their development. And quite frankly, I think we need to wake up the dangers of that, and we need to make some really bold decisions about how to protect children.
And we've chatted, those screens, we don't know what they are, but maybe iPads or whatever. But we've got some research from American psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who's tracked the rise of smartphones alongside a sort of sharp increase in anxiety, depression, self-harm, distress in children and teenagers. From your perspective, how closely does that align with what children and families are telling you on the ground?
It absolutely does. It specifically aligns to what children and young people tell us. So if I think about our work, we've been around for 140 odd years. I've been in social work for around 30 odd years. If I think about the types of issues that we would be working with previously and the demographic of children and backgrounds that they would come from, that has changed remarkably since 2010. So children report that, for example, the time that they spend on social media is directly correlated to having a low mood or an anxious mood afterwards. So they talk about not being able to switch off, not being able to step away, both a fear of missing out because you're not there, but also an anxious, driven concern when you are on it all the time because you know what it's taking from you in relation to schoolwork or relationships or hobbies or activities that you would prefer to do. So the sharp increase in the levels of children who come to us because their need is around anxiety, sleeplessness, low self-esteem, online bullying, exposure to extreme pornography or violence. From 2010 to now, it's exploded. There's no, it's hard because people go, well, what are the hard facts of it? But of course, the evidence is what children tells us. The evidence is what we've seen in our own children. We know that there has to be a correlation between those two things because that's the only thing that can, the only thing that makes sense. It's the new thing that we've introduced in our children's lives.
Yeah, that rise has been since the introduction of smartphones. And you mentioned to me that some of the children that you've spoken to are talking about younger children seeing things that they really shouldn't be seeing. I don't know if you can just talk a little bit about those conversations that you've had.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk directly to children, and I've done this, I've spoken to some remarkable young women who've been helping us campaign for change in the system around justice for children who've been abused. And they want to campaign because they want to prevent harm to other children. So they're amazing campaigners. They're very, very knowledgeable. And their motivation is what they see happening to younger children and they want to stop that. And when we've asked them about their experience of online harm or their exposure to content online, and sometimes I'll go and I'll lay it out and say, old people like me think it's this, this, and this, and I think I'm exaggerating some of what I believe to be the case. And they literally looked at me and said, it is much worse than that. You are not exaggerating, it's much worse. And then they talked about their concern for the younger brothers and sisters or younger cousins, where they were describing 8, 9-year-olds being exposed to particularly harmful content, either exposure to pornography, but also to some of the influencers who, for young boys, really target messaging around women and girls. And they were able to see one young woman was telling me she was discussing with her aunt who was concerned about the way her 9-year-old was speaking to her. And this girl said to her, but you do know what he watches, right? That's where that comes from. And this parent, she said, had no idea.
Gosh.
So there's this.
You mentioned as well online grooming, which you say is happening to younger children.
I mean, that type of, what these children were saying is there is nowhere safe. None of the platforms are safe. And that people who want to offend children, offend against children, target children, groom children, exploit children, extort children are incredibly sophisticated at making connection with children by pretending that they're not adults and sliding into their messages through various other means, but also just honing in on some of the vulnerabilities that exposure to online content has already created in children. So young women feeling really vulnerable about how they look or what their size is, young boys being really also interested in body image. And these people really know how to target and exploit that in children. And it's, that's what they're saying is whether it's, any platform that we all think is about messaging your friends, your social circle and keeping included in things, nowhere is safe. These images or these people can get access to children. And we just seem to be throwing our hands up saying, well, we don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you said that, you thought you might be overreacting. And I think parents sometimes think they're overreacting. Yet what we're seeing and the data is suggesting something quite serious is happening. Why do you think as a nation we're struggling, or as a society, to sort of name this as a real public health threat?
I don't think we're struggling with this as a nation. I think we're struggling with this globally across the world. I mean, this is a consistent theme. It's not that the UK or Scotland in particular has a particular issue with it. All countries, all children globally, I think it's an issue. I think we are struggling for there's a lot of different reasons. I think there's that bit about it, isn't there, that it's where it's real niche knowledge. The technology is complicated. It's new. We're not used to being able to navigate a world that's purely online, where it's a free-for-all and we don't really know how to regulate it and control it. We've not grown up with it. So the adults around children, I think, really struggle with it. I think, as always, when it comes to children, we prioritise other things above children's best interests, whether that's business development, economics, all of these things that we don't really always recognise are connected to the well-being and welfare of children. So I think there's an issue sometimes around that. And I think we don't hold the people that are responsible accountable enough, because we're either frightened or we're anxious about what that will do. And then I also think that we worry a lot about speaking to children about topics like this. So we lack hard data. So although, Jonathan Haidt's, you've cited that research as really valuable, and there are other research projects globally that we can draw upon, there is a reluctance. I hear this a lot, where people don't really want to talk to children about their experience of being harmed, particularly sexual harm. It's been a long-term problem in relation to children who've been sexually abused offline. We don't ask the question because we're worried about it, or we think we might get into trouble in terms of leading questions and then maybe compromising investigations. But I also think as adults, it's this funny paradox, isn't it, where we kind of know that they'll be watching stuff that we don't want them to, but we don't really want to get into a conversation about it because we're scared that we're talking with them about things that they're too young to understand. And so we're in this a bit of a messed up position, I think, around the online world. And then the other thing is, quite rightly, there is a children's rights perspective here, where there are lots of good things about the internet and the content that we can access and the information that we can get. Children have a right to access that, but it needs to be safe first and foremost. And we've not quite worked out our position on how do we balance children's rights to information and access with our responsibility as adults to keep those children safe and to enforce safety on platforms where we have no control over them. And I stand by this. Technology companies seem to shrug their shoulders and not really mind that our children are accessing platforms where they're harmed. We hear very little from those platforms as part of this conversation. They've not kicked it off. They don't talk about what they should do. It's all something that is either undermined, swept under the carpet, or left to other people to try and sort out.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking at a time when the UK government has set out proposals to ban social media for under 16s. And you've said very clearly that perhaps there's no silver bullet when it comes to children and screen use. Why do you think that is important? And do you think banning social media could be a solution?
It might be part of the solution. I'm not sure. I don't think jumping to solve a very complex, nuanced, difficult problem with very blunt solutions is going to be the answer. And I think we may force some of the most vulnerable children into corners of the dark web where they will be left even more vulnerable than they are currently. So I think it might be part of the solution. I think we need to be open to a whole load of targeted and specific measures. But one of the important things that we need to do is consult with children, consult with young people, talk with families, and also think about how can we make it all enforceable, because kids are super smart in this space, and so are the people that seek to harm them. And there are ways in which I think that could cause us more problems in the long term. So I'm not saying it's not part of the answer, but I don't think it's the whole. I think it sounds like it's a quick answer, but it's not.
No. I mean, do you think there's merit to having children on social media if we can remove the harmful elements of it? Do you think it's children have a right to it? Or do you think it would be better that, to somehow remove those elements if we can do it safely?
I think, again, it's a question that we need to explore based on the evidence. So for young children, I think we need a really careful review of what is the evidence and impact of screen time on children's well-being and physical, emotional and relational development. So my strong instinct is that we should not, and I think the evidence here is incontrovertible, we should not be allowing babies, toddlers, young children to be on screens all day. It will impact their social and emotional development. We're already seeing the way they are struggling when they attend school or nursery in terms of language development, socialisation, their ability to read social cues and faces and expressions. So I think we need some really strong public health evidence-informed information that gets out to parents. And then I think we need to think about the addictive nature of screens. We're all addicted. And so why are we placing ridiculous expectations that little children will be able to regulate their behaviour when we can't regulate ours? So we need a whole suite of conversations about what we model for our children in terms of our attention. Where is our attention? How much time goes by when you pick up your, and I'm as guilty as anybody, you pick up your phone, you look at Instagram and 40 minutes go by and you've no idea where it's gone and what you've done. So we need to have really clear conversations, brave, open, honest about our own behaviour. And then we need to think about balancing children's rights and also what are the alternatives to screen time? Because we have really not invested in play spaces for children, youth and community groups for children. We need to think about developing a whole suite of activities offline that are at least as exciting, if not more, than being online is. And we need to shift our perspective as adults and parents and caregivers that they're okay because they're in the house and they're in their bedroom. And we need to reinforce this message that just as you might not know where your child is when they go out to play, you don't know where they're going when they're in their room because the internet is a place. They're not, we like to think they're safe because they're in their bedroom, and yet it can be the most unsafe, most at risk environment. But that's one of the things we sometimes hear parents say, well, at least I know where he is when he's gaming because he's upstairs in the bedroom. So we need to shift our perspectives about children's rights to, yes, get access to information that's online safely at appropriate ages, but equally we need to remember all of the knowledge and science there is about child development and what children need to develop safely, which includes outdoor space, taking risks away from the eyes and gaze of parents, but in safe spaces with other children. They need to be made to feel welcome in our communities, and they don't right now. People don't really like to see children and young people on the streets playing. So we've got to solve this problem, we've got to tackle what we think about children, what we think about childhood, where do we want to see teenagers, and where are we prepared to invest our resources to make sure that we give children and young people what they need to grow up healthy, to become good citizens, and to be protected from all of the dangers that they're currently exposed to.
I mean, Jonathan Haidt described childhood as shifting from play-based to phone-based. What do you think from your work children have lost out on as screens have taken up the space in their lives? I mean, now, well, playing on the street is not really an option, is it? Because of traffic and maybe sometimes, I don't know, air pollution and other dangers. Do you sort of feel like, they've lost something as well in, just because times have changed?
Absolutely. And we could see that in children's physical health as well as their emotional well-being. So they don't move as much. They're not as active. They don't get to take those safe risks away from the gaze of adults like we all did. Then they don't feel welcome in their communities quite often. Children and young people do say to us regularly, well, what else can we do? There's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere to be together. I think we need to really think about all that children have. Childhood, what do we think about? I think we had this conversation before where we think about what is childhood? How long does it last? What does a good childhood look like? It is becoming shorter and shorter. And we are, despite the knowledge that we have, the amount of information we have about child development, we have created less opportunity for children to develop into adulthood through play, through socialization, through being in the outdoors, through opportunities to try things and get them wrong without it being recorded on a phone and used to shame you everywhere you go. This hyper focus on how children at a very young age look, and then how that's backed up by, marketing, and the way children have become a commodity for business to sell things to based on, how they look and what's fashionable at a younger and younger age, marketing through social media linked to offline activity around makeup for children that are really young. It's the whole thing. I mean, we talk about the digital destruction of childhood, but we also talk about a childhood emergency at Children First, where we do not allow children to be children for very long at all, and certainly not as long as it actually takes to grow up and be fully developed as a human.
And how concerned are you about this, what this means for children who are already under pressure? So sort of children in care, living with trauma, children growing up in poverty. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as always, those children have additional vulnerability, and they are more often than not harmed the most because they might not have the relationships around them to keep them safe, and they might not have had that core environment that's nurtured a sense of self and confidence. But I think all children, and it breaks my heart to say this, but I think there is an element of risk for all children. Childhood is a protective characteristic. By its very nature, it means you're vulnerable. You're not fully formed. You're not able to protect yourself. But we are placing expectation on all children that we can hand them these incredibly powerful devices, and they will be able to manage something that is highly addictive, can expose them to things that are beyond their developmental age to understand, and we expect them to regulate and manage that. So it makes no sense in any way you cut it, does it?
So in that sense, it's important we talk about screens in general, screen time itself, rather than about social media, which has been the focus of this government. Do you think that is what we should be doing, just looking at the whole thing?
Yeah, I think we need to think about, and this is Children First are really pushing for this, and we're talking to a lot of partners about this and other concerned people, including children, young people and their families. What we need to do is some sort of, I think, public health campaign where we have a national conversation about the reality of the research, the distilling of that research into messages, key messages, which are not frightening, not blaming and not shaming, but factual. We give that to parents and carers, and then we use that to demand that our legislators and those in charge of the way in which we manage our, laws and regulations and guidance to professionals and to children and families, use that information and the conversation and consultation to come up with a really broad spectrum of actions that will help to deal with this problem. And so we need to question whether or not it was a good idea to give every child an iPad when they go to school, whether that is a really good idea in primary school for little children. And we know in some schools, they're not just used as learning tools. They also get access to games as well. And some of those games are fun, and interesting. But what it does is creates this almost addiction to being on a screen. It's easier to play a game on a screen than it is to go and get your box of Scrabble out the cupboard, set it all up, persuade somebody to play with you. So I think we need to really think about all the intersections and connections between all different parts of this. And we need to all be saying, we know more than we've ever known. When we give our children devices, all of us, when we put that device in their hand, what conversations are we going to have with our children and young people about their use of it, our use of it, how we might check whether or not it's safe. My plea to people now is I would be delay the device, delay devices for as long as you can, because once it's very hard to regulate yourself and themselves, and it becomes a source of conflict in parent-child relationships very quickly if you try and monitor and regulate the way your child uses the device. And at an age when, normally you begin to have a bit of conflict with your 12, 13, 14-year-old, that's absolutely entirely appropriate and natural in a developmental phase. But if you're having if it's pushing those conflicts down to 6, 7, at a point that just should not be happening. You should not be in those types of conflicts with 6, 7-year-olds. They should be still at the stage where, you're the most important person in their world, and what you say they believe, and they want to spend time with you, and they listen to you, and they look up to you. The devices are getting in the way of that.
I mean, the delayed screens for as long as possible could create new conflicts, because while other children get the screens, people will just, some people it'll have a 2-tier sort of thing, and some people will be invited to the party that went out on Snapchat, and others won't get the memo. So that's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, you don't think the sort of legislative change should come in? You think it's more about public education, do you?
I do think it's both and. So I think it's having the conversation about devices. If you've got a little child now, if you've got a 3-4-year-old, and you're in a friendship group where they've met at nursery and they're going into primary school together, and they'll probably travel on through to secondary school. There are lots of examples of school communities, friendship groups, parents and carers saying, can we make a commitment to each other in our child's friendship group that we won't give them a device until this age? And if we all do it, if we all sign up to that, then you avoid those conflicts about I'm the only one in the group that doesn't have a phone. Because you're so right to mention that. That is one of the key things that parents and caregivers say to us. It is impossible to resist, because you're also terrified that your child is isolated and lonely, and that's also a real threat to a happy, healthy childhood. But if you can get school, friendship communities to agree with that, and I think there are some examples of whole villages doing that for children, which are really powerful. Yeah. And then you need governments to say because I feel sorry for schools. There's a lot of conversation about, head teachers should just ban smartphones. But then, of course, what you get is this inconsistency. Well, if you go to this school, you're protected and you're not dependent on screens for learning. But if you're in a school 3, towns away or streets away, and that teacher takes a different approach, then you've got screens. So I think for parents, for children, and for head teachers and teachers, we need governments to step in and say, based on the evidence, based on the public health review that we've done, this is the legislation and guidance that we're going to enforce. It is like all of the things that we did with the really good public health campaign: smoking, seatbelts. So we looked at the evidence of harm. But it's slightly easy, those are slightly simpler things, but they're similar. And we knew that there was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of people who thought it was a lot of nonsense. But what it proved was information, evidence of harm, shared widely, then really good campaigns, and then legislation drives behaviour change and also culture and attitude change. So you don't shame and blame people, but you make it a little bit uncomfortable, socially unacceptable to have a cigarette while you're in the presence of a child or while you're eating a meal. We need to do the same thing so that we'd stop normalising 2 and 3-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds in a restaurant or in a cafe with their device, where no one's speaking to anybody. That shouldn't be normal, and yet it is, because actually sitting at a table with food is a key point at which you build strong relationships, you have good conversations, you model emotional regulation and behaviours and social behaviours, and we are missing out on all of those opportunities for children. And as parents and carers, we're missing really key moments to connect with children. Childhood lasts for such a short time, and when they're up and gone, most of us reflect back. I wish I'd done more of that. I wish I hadn't always said, oh, I'm busy at work. I wish I'd played more. And I do think all of that, we really need to support parents to be able to think about that more.
Do you think it's also important to get children's voices in this conversation?
Without doubt. Yeah,
Why?
I mean, we build all of our, because our experiences, it's the most effective way to get change. So in all of our campaigning, over many, many decades, the thing that we've learned is that when children speak and are listened to, what they've got to say is usually always the smartest opinion in the room, the most practical and the best informed, when it's about issues that affect them. And when we can create safe space for them to share their voices in a way that suits them. So it might not always be in a verbal articulation. It might be, I just gave a copy of a book that a child has written about her experience of going through the care and justice process after being abused. I've just handed her book to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice in Scotland to say, this little girl, this young woman wants you to read her story so that it doesn't happen to other children. So what we've learned is when we can create safe space for children to create content about their experience and what should happen, they are really willing and able to do that, and they do it really, really well. So children's voices are crucial in this debate, and we cannot make decisions without them because we'll miss stuff, because they understand what's going on much better than we do. So yeah, I mean, that would be my plea, that whatever we're deciding, wherever we go, children's voices have to be at the heart of this.
Do you think we need to still gather evidence, or do you think there's enough evidence now to say we need public health campaign, we need to act?
I mean, I'm not a specialist in this area in terms of the academic research. I think there is a lot of evidence out there. I think my hunch is we've always got enough evidence. What we struggle to do is, I guess, give equal weight to the evidence. So it may not be a randomized control trial in a, international research project, but if we are working with, if we're reaching 10,000 children a year, and by far the majority, upward of 90% of those children are talking about their experience online as being harmful, that is really good first-hand evidence that we need to listen to. So we maybe need to review all of the evidence and package it in a way that it can be delivered and distilled into key messages that are easy for parents to understand. Because right now it comes at them in different ways and different formats from different sources. Sometimes it's international and they say, well, it's not really like that here. And the other thing about this, though, is we do need to recognise that what we know about it today is very different from what will be happening tomorrow, because it is the pace of change and the new ways in which people can be exposed to harms are it's impossible to keep up with them. So we do need to keep a fresh eye to that and constantly update our knowledge and information. So I think maybe let's review the evidence that we've got. Let's think about how we share that and distill that. Let's think about the action that we can take now. And then let's have a really good future-proofed plan about how we keep on top of the research and the information. Because we don't, we've got a good indication, but we don't yet really know definitively of all of the ways in which exposure to these digital lives have impacted children. And we're probably just reaching the first generation who are coming into adulthood now. And certainly one of the most powerful things that I think young people say to us is when we say to 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, what age will you give your own child a device? They all say, oh my goodness, not until they're 16. It's terrible. I would never let my children see what's online.
Yeah, they do. I mean, do you think that this public health campaign that you envisage should be delivered to parents of all ages? You have new mums. I think we've talked as well in the past about new mums get help with all sorts of other health things, but not informed about the risks or the dangers or the problems associated with screen use. So, I mean, how would it be delivered and to whom?
I think, so we have this brilliant thing in Scotland called the baby box. Every new baby in the country that's born is welcomed with a box that's delivered from the government, and it's got clothes and it's got toys and it's got information leaflets, and it supports, parents and carers with a whole range of information. We probably, to my knowledge, we give no information about how to go from, how important it might be to have screens nowhere near your baby whilst you're caring for them. So, when you're feeding a young baby, you need to be looking at their eyes if you can as much as possible rather than looking at your phone. We need to think about, I think the Irish have done a brilliant campaign, which people have probably seen online, about perfect strangers walking past a child in a shopping mall and saying happy birthday, Molly, or whatever. And it's because this child's whole life has been shared on digital platforms. So it's about giving information to parents and carers about, just think about it. Just think about your child's, not only their development and your relationship with them, but also what you might be exposing them to. So there's ways that you could do it in initiatives that are universal. Health visitors need to be informed so that when they're speaking and visiting families, they're able to talk about it. We should dive into routine, sensitive inquiries about what's your digital footprint like? How easy are you going to find it to adjust caring for a baby and not scrolling on your screen all day? Because here's some of the information that's beginning to come out about that. Did you know it's really important to have eye gaze, to look at your baby, to smile, to mirror, to sing, to read books? And so I think getting information out across the piece to new parents is really important, because that's when we're all are most motivated to do the right thing, and then continue that information alongside some of the other measures that we've talked about. But the other thing I think we need to be honest about is we all need this information too. This should not just be targeted at as adults' role as carers or caregivers or parents. We also need to think about what's it harming in our lives. How much are our relationships with our children being harmed because we're too busy prioritising time on the phone? What does it do to our mental health, our friendships, our ability to get outside and exercise? So this isn't just a public health campaign for children. That's the angle we'll come at it. But we all need to look at our digital and online behaviour, because there's no point in doing all this stuff for children if we're still on our phones all the time and we're not there to be with them, we're not present with them. So it's massive, and it reaches into all parts of society.
Yeah. I mean, do you think it's unrealistic to expect parents or carers to manage this issue on their own?
Yeah, I do. I think it's really unfair. I think it's really unfair that we expect under pressure, because, it's hard bringing up children. And with this issue, I do think this is one, along with many others, that we need to, as a society, give parents and caregivers a lot of help. And what that looks like for me would be legislation, guidance, information, support, and then accountability. What would happen if? So not, we parents will say to us, it is impossible once you've given them a phone to get the phone. It just becomes a slippery slope to, parents are great. They try and keep it out the bedrooms. They try and say, don't have it at the dinner table. They try and make sure that there's, I heard a parent talking about they don't have any screen time at home at all, and yet their children are on the iPad at school playing Minecraft. And, she was throwing her hands up in the air, saying, I don't know what to do about that, because that's building this addictive, connection to the device. And when the children are coming home, we're not kind of doing homework and having a play and having tea. We're having an argument about why we're not having the device on at home. So giving parents clear guidance where they can say to the child, well, even, it's not my decision. I agree with it, but it's one that's enforced by government. So it's a bit like alcohol, cigarettes, and all of the other things that would protect children from offline that we seem to kind of lose our sense when it comes to the online world.
But despite that, do you think there would be a danger of just suddenly banning, apart from suddenly banning social media for 16s and under? What could be the other drawbacks? Firstly, you mentioned the dark web, and I'm wondering if you think that it'd be difficult for children to adjust once they reach 16, or if they will find other ways to access things. Do you think there's a positive role for social media?
I think it's children do talk about how good it is to connect with their friends, to know, to get access to information where they've got a specific interest in something. They can find a community that shares that interest. We know, lots of children, lots of neurodiverse children might have, or divergent children might have challenges in making friendships, but they might be able to find, really supportive, kind communities and information that can support them. So there are good things there that we need to try and protect, and we need to protect children's rights to be able to access those things. But to me, the right to be safe trumps all of that. And until we can make it safe, we've got to be really cautious. Until we, it seems to me we're starting the kind of decision making at the wrong end. We're saying, right, children, all these people, all these grown-ups that want to harm you, we're not going to do anything with them, or we do try, but we're not really going to do anything about that. All these tech companies that know that all these loopholes and opportunities exist for children to be, and we're not really starting the conversation with them. We're going to start the conversation by removing all of this from you. And that does feel unfair, and it does feel like we're forced into that position because we haven't sorted out the other stuff. We have allowed these tech companies to develop apps and platforms willy-nilly, without regulation, without identifying the risks. They do, in my view, everything that I've read tells me that they do know how to solve this problem. They choose not to. And we publicly need to hold them accountable for that.
Yeah. I don't know how legislatively one can do that, but you mentioned to me about very young children in nurseries pressing books as if it was not knowing how to read books anymore. So do you think there's a role for early years settings and schools to play alongside families?
For sure. Yeah, I think they do. I think they try really, really hard. And there's all sorts of initiatives where families and babies are given free books, and there's lots of opportunity for parents and caregivers to get support on how do you read aloud, how do you use books in the home. So I think there are initiatives there, and people are trying really hard. I just think we're up against something that is so powerful and so sophisticated that it's really hard to crack that. It's really hard to cut through that. So we've got to measure our expectations of all of the carers, parents, teachers, nursery, whoever, alongside this beast, this machine, this incredibly powerful machine. And we've got to start working out how we help everybody manage all of that.
And what sort of questions should governments be asking before they introduce legislation that will affect millions of families, including children?
I think they need to have that conversation about at what point would this legislation come into force, and how would it be reinforced? How would it be enacted? And what would the information campaign be to families so that they could help parents? What is it they're going to do if children don't come off social media? How are they going to enforce it? And also, what conversations are we going to have with people around it? So in the consultation, it would really need to be targeted support and and questions at children and young people, and then the same from families and parents and adults. And then there needs to be specific questions about, because parents are going to say, well, what happens if they work out how to get on a platform that they're supposedly not allowed on? Or what happens if they lie about their age? Or, there'll be all sorts of ways in which smart children and smart platforms will get around this. So I think they need to do a lot of working out of what is possible before we go out and say this is the solution. And the other thing I think they should be asking children and families is, if your life isn't spent online, what would you like to be doing offline? And they need to make a commitment to fund some of that.
Yeah. I mean, it may be that they introduce some kind of facial ID for everyone before they can access things, which then I think civil liberties groups might be worried about that. And that means we're all kind of put into a system where we're having to be identified and give our sort of facial recognition, raises other questions really. So, yeah, and as you say, the problem it's not ours to sort of sort out. It's the tech companies that... you're now, Children First is now working with the Scottish Government to develop a new framework and research base to inform policy. So do you see that work as really urgent, and what are the next steps for that?
So we're working with Scottish Government colleagues to force that urgency on them. So we are really pushing them to say, can we do something about this? Can we do something about it fast? We know there's been a lot of internal conversations within Scottish Government. We'd like that to move at pace and to become more external. So we're, hopefully going to host jointly some conversations with experts, with people who share that concern, to build a sense of urgency. It's both urgent and we need to go carefully, but yes. we can't wait. Generations of children are being harmed now, so we are really pushing the government to go faster, but to be informed.
Yeah, and it's civil servants, but how has that been received? Have you had a positive kind of feedback?
Yeah, I think they share our concern. I think there's no question that people acknowledge the problem, know that it's a real worry. I think there is a concern that, like the rest of us, they're not really sure what to do about it. It's a really hard, complex problem. And in many ways, that's exactly what it is. So we shouldn't always look to our politicians to come up with the answers. We should look to them to create the space for us to work together on what the answer is. And then they need to implement really smartly some actions. And then we hold them accountable for the delivery of those actions.
But do you think that policy, as you say, politicians aren't necessarily got the whole answer, but children, parents, carers, professionals, who would you want to see involved with that sort of policy making or public health messaging?
I think it needs to be viewed as a child protection concern. So it's everybody's job, in the same way that it is everybody's job if you see a child in your community or in your family that you think is being harmed. It is a well-known mantra and responsibility as adults that you must take action to protect that child. I think it needs to be seen in the context of protecting childhood, protecting children from harm. It's everybody's responsibility. We all have a responsibility to make sure that we manage our own behaviour. We look out for children, and we remember, that we owe something to children to keep them safe. That we need to push for action to be taken. So it's hard to single. It's always easy with children to say parents, teachers, social workers, police officers, health visitors, GPs, but it's tech companies and it's people in the community who don't want to see children playing on the street, or taxpayers that don't want to pay a bit of extra tax so that children have good community groups to go and attend, or that we invest in sports facilities. It's absolutely everybody. If we are serious about keeping our children safe, then we all need to think about how we contribute to that. So the conversation has to involve everybody.
Yeah. And you've also talked about the need for a cabinet level responsibility. And do you think leadership at that level is important?
I really do. And we do, in Scotland in particular, there has been a strong focus on children's rights and a priority given to making Scotland the best place in the world to grow up is the mantra of the policy that the Scottish Government implements and is proud of, well, if we're the best place in the world to grow up, we would not tolerate what is happening to our children in the digital world. So we would prioritise that at the highest level of government. We would invest in it in a serious way, and we would take urgent action to make sure that we were tackling that. And we were a world leader. If we're the best place in the world to grow up, we need to be a world leader in how we tackle these emerging, really complex and challenging problems.
I mean, one could say that most parents are worried about it, and they're clearly anxious about the impact of screens, and most may not need public health messaging. They're just at their wits' end, and the behaviour often doesn't change. They seem to not be able to. So even if you tell parents how sort of potentially harmful it is, how do you think you can shift behaviours?
I think it's going to take time, because I think we're 15 years into this, 16 years into this trend of us all having these powerful machines and devices in our hands. So it's going to take time. I think there are some parallels we can learn from with some of the previous things that we thought were okay that are not. We have a track record of changing public perception and public behaviour, and it's a combination of things that you need to do. But I do think legislation probably is where we need to go, and really quite firm boundaries about things. People want clarity. And they want firm, we always say clear is kind. It's very kind if you can just give people clear guidance, but it's also important that they've contributed to that so we know what's practicable and possible. We can't just load a whole burden of shame on parents to say, everybody will be tut-tutting and raising their eyebrows if you've got a 4-year-old on a device when you're in a public space without the backup to help those parents. I do believe it needs to target adults and our behaviour online as well. We all need to, this is an addictive behaviour that we've all got. And we know how hard it is to break addictive behaviours.
I mean, legislation, can you even imagine what kind of legislation that might shape into?
I guess what I think is it might not be one single piece of legislation. I would suspect it has to be built into existing legislation. But I think there needs to be really careful consideration, consultation, discussion with experts like Ofcom, all the organisations that understand all of this stuff, digital communication and how it works. And also, enforcement, police, how would this work? And it also needs to, there's been some conversations, hasn't there, about whether or not can't remember what the name of the technology is, but the AI technology that allows people to be kind of, exploited on X. And there's been a decision, I'm not on X, so I don't keep up with it all. But there's a decision about, or a discussion about whether or not they would just ban them. They're just not allowed in the country because of that. So, I mean, that's quite extreme, but there are things that we can do that we need to consider.
A lot of the platforms can do that. It's not just X, but it is terrifying.
It is.
And what would you say to foster carers who are trying to set boundaries right now, but just feel undermined by the wider social norms and this kind of, so-and-so's got it, I won't be invited. How do you think they should respond?
I think, for foster carers, it's an interesting one because they're probably used to having to realign, reset boundaries.
If you'd like to hear more episodes,
change a lot about what children have been experiencing
free resources,
so you'll find what I would say to them is use some of the techniques that you've already got and some of the experience that you've already got, where the messaging that you're giving to children is, I've been asked to do this really important job to look after you, to care for you. And some of that might feel a bit different, but it comes from a really good place of fulfilling our responsibility to give you the best possible care. So in this house, we don't have phones and digital devices in our bedrooms. And if the child is so used to that that's a really difficult option for them, understanding that and going at a gentle pace and really building in attempts to try different things. So, if a child is so used to living in the online world and that's been a sense of safety for them, for some children it would be, it might not be the best idea for the foster parent to say, in this house, we never have devices in our bedroom, you're not having that anymore, thanks very much. It might be that it's more of a conversation and negotiation. Tell me why this matters to you. How do you use it? What happens there? Because here's what we think. Here's what we want to do. Can we have an accommodation? Can we have a discussion? Can we compromise? So all the things that foster carers are brilliant at, resetting rules and boundaries, but doing that in a loving, caring way that understands the impact of trauma, that understands all of the complexities that some of the children in their care will have lived with. So drawing on all of that experience and applying it to this is what I would say. Don't view it as something entirely different than what you've done before.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great advice. And if you had to sort of sum it up, would you think we could make what's the biggest mistake you think we could make right now?
I do think, I think it's rushing to simple solutions. I think it's blanket bans. I think it's laying, the main one for me is laying the responsibility on children themselves. I think that is an abdication of our responsibility as adults.
Do you think a blanket ban is doing just that?
I think it could. I think a ban on its own without really careful consideration of unintended consequences could be worse and definitely isn't going to be enough on its own.
But just to pull you up on that, so it could be worse in the sense that children would go to the dark web or get round it, and we're not a more unregulated territory. But does that mean if we say there's a ban and children are responsible for breaking that ban, are we then just reneging ourselves of the responsibility of that? Is that what you're saying? That
I think
by doing the ban, we're putting responsibility on children and not taking it upon ourselves to sort out the mess or problems associated with it.
Yeah, because if children do get around the ban, who are we going to hold accountable? Are we going to charge them? Are we going to criminalise them? Are we going to criminalise their parents? Of course we're not. So it needs to be well thought through about how would you enforce the ban? How would you make sure that it was safe? How would you bring it in? I am not unsympathetic to the notion because I feel the same level of panic as everybody else. But what we need to do is, act fast and urgently, but act intelligently. And it might not be the most intelligent response to go, I know what the answer is. We'll ban children from everything and then we'll keep them safe. I doubt very much that in itself will do what we want it to do. I think it's much more nuanced, like everything, much more complicated.
So you would like this, you don't agree that you're not happy with this proposal. It's not, you wouldn't want to see it go ahead, that you wouldn't want to see a ban right now. It may be in the future, but right now, because of that, you don't think it's a good idea to just suddenly ban social media for kids?
Well, we don't know anything about what's in the consultation yet, so I think we would be very open. We would respond to it. We would look at it, and we would do a really detailed response based on conversations with children, young people, and families. So this is, we're having a conversation about what my response is, given my experience. Yeah. We do nothing in Children First in terms of responding to things like this without the voice of children and young people and families, because we serve their interests and their rights. So I have a strong sense of caution about it. I have an equal sense of I understand why we think this might be the right thing to do. And what I'd be interested in is what the content of any consultation would be. And like everything, often the headline is not really what's in the detail. So sometimes the headline might be children banned from social media, as it was in some of the international countries like Australia. When you looked underneath that, it wasn't actually that. it was more of an expectation on the tech companies to prove age and to really think about it from that point of view. So sometimes the headlines make it sound simple and it might not be quite as simple. So I'm a bit kind of like curious, interested.
Yeah. Well, proving age, they get around that easily, don't they? Already,
yes, they do.
Get your parents' driving license or get your sister's, older sister, whatever. So, it is how effective it's and how one measures that, I suppose. You can't really, how would you do that? So if there is, success, if we do move towards keeping children safer, what do you think that would look like in, say, 5 years' time? If Scotland gets it right with your help, and the help of Children First, what do you want to see?
What we'd hope to see is that children's reporting of some of the distress that they're in just now goes down. So a lot of the requests for support that come through school counselling, our services, child and adolescent psychiatry, GP surgeries, a lot of what drives that is anxiety. We have an anxiety epidemic. So we'd hope to see a measurable reduction in that. We'd hope that children's development, well, the time they were going into school, their language development, their social and emotional development would have caught up, because we know it's really deteriorated since pre-COVID days. We would also see enormous investment in community places, spaces, youth clubs, sports activities and hobbies for children and young people. And so essentially the dream is we see happier, healthier, safer children and more relaxed parents and carers who are clearer about the boundaries and roles and responsibilities that they play to keep the children safe. And they feel they live in a country where they get the support that they need, the information that they need in order to fulfill that obligation.
Yeah, so it's about outcomes. It's not saying, oh, well, you only but children are averaging less time on the screens. It's about how they're thriving or flourishing rather than how much screen time. So it's not...
Yeah. We have to measure the stuff that really matters, don't we?
Yes.
I mean, those might be the indicators, but the real outcomes we want to see are more children involved in hobbies, because we know how good the evidence is really clear on that. More children visible in our communities. I love it when I go out and I see children playing in the street, or I love it, and I know it's a wee bit controversial because lots of people don't. I love it when I see groups of teenagers hanging around chatting to each other, because that is developmentally where they're supposed to be. And I really love it if there's a community centre nearby where they can be in there, being together, hanging out, talking, getting a bit of support and information, but just getting a chance to be children and young people. So that's kind of what I would want to see as the change.
And just finally, if there was one thing that you'd want every decision maker or parent or carer to understand about children and smartphones, what would that be?
Just one thing. Just one thing.
Yeah. What would you think people should know about it? What do you think is the main message?
I think that we just don't know enough. We have no idea of what children's experience is online, and we need to wake up really fast to that.
Yeah. Mary Glasgow, it's been an absolute pleasure, really informative and fantastic to talk to you again. Thank you so much for joining us for this. Thank you.
If you'd like to hear more episodes, explore upcoming live events, or access free resources, you'll find all the links in the episode description. Just scroll down wherever you're listening.